All right, everyone, this is Jimmy Kimmel. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, happy whatever you're celebrating with your family this time of year. I got to be honest with you, I've been sitting here all week just shaking my head at what I'm about to tell you. And before we jump into this thing, you know the deal. You're here on Future in View. We don't do spin. We don't do propaganda. We just talk straight. And that's exactly what you're going to get from me right now. So do me a personal favor. Hit that subscribe button. Not because I'm asking thousands of other people. This is specifically for you. When you hit subscribe, you're telling me you trust what I'm saying here, and that means everything to me. So please, right now, if you haven't already, just one click, you're part of something real here. Now, what we're talking about today is going to blow your mind, and I got to tell you, it's one of those stories that makes you realize we're living in the strangest political times in American history. We've got a president who just delivered what might be the most politically self-destructive moment of his second term so far. And the person most affected by it? One of his own most vocal supporters from the 2024 campaign. You know what really gets me about this story? It's not just about politics. It's about human relationships. It's about trust. It's about what happens when someone you believed in, someone you worked for, someone you convinced your neighbors to support, turns around and says things that make you question everything you thought you knew about them. That's not just political drama. That's personal. Let me set the scene for you because this story has everything: political miscalculation, unexpected consequences, and a lesson in what happens when campaign promises meet governing reality. We're talking about what happened this week when Trump made controversial statements about the Somali community in Minnesota and how that decision created a significant backlash from within his own coalition. So here's what we know from public reporting. Tuesday afternoon, Trump was in a cabinet meeting at the White House that went on for over 2 hours. The cameras were rolling for the public portion. Near the end, a reporter asked him about recent fraud cases in Minnesota involving state welfare programs. Now, according to reports from the New York Times and other outlets, federal prosecutors have been investigating and prosecuting fraudulent billing schemes involving social service programs, and multiple defendants in these cases are of Somali descent. This is documented criminal activity that law enforcement is appropriately addressing. But here's where the story takes a turn. Instead of focusing on law enforcement efforts or the importance of accountability in government programs, Trump made statements that went much broader. According to multiple news reports, he said, and I'm quoting from the coverage, "We could go one way or the other, and we're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country." He used the word garbage to describe what he characterized as problematic immigration. Then, according to the reporting, he made additional statements saying they contribute nothing and expressing that he didn't want certain communities in the country. Multiple news outlets covered these remarks, and they were broadcast live during the cabinet meeting. Now, I've been following Trump's public statements for years, and even by the standards we've become accustomed to, this created quite a reaction. According to census data that's publicly available, about 95% of Somali Americans are U.S. citizens. More than half were born in the United States. We're talking about a community that includes refugees who fled civil war, people who built businesses, families who sent their kids to American schools, and citizens who participate in the democratic process. But here's where this story gets really interesting. And this is the part that shows you something important about political coalitions. Because there's this guy named Salman Fiqy. According to multiple news reports, Salman immigrated to America from Somalia in 2009. He built a business, got involved in local politics, and in 2024, he became one of Trump's most prominent supporters in the Somali community. News reports show he campaigned for Trump, organized voter outreach efforts, and was visible at Trump rallies in Minnesota. And this outreach apparently worked. According to reporting from various outlets, Trump actually made gains among some Somali voters in 2024. Some of this was attributed to conservative positions on social issues. Some was linked to frustration within Muslim communities about the Biden administration's handling of the Gaza conflict. People like Salman, according to interviews, looked past previous controversial statements because they believed Trump might deliver on economic and public safety promises. This is actually pretty remarkable when you think about it from a campaign strategy perspective. Building coalitions is incredibly difficult. You have to find common ground between different groups who might not naturally agree on everything. You have to convince people to look beyond their differences and focus on shared goals. The Trump campaign apparently did this successfully with multiple communities in 2024, including parts of the Somali community that had traditionally voted Democratic. That takes real political skill and genuine outreach effort. So here's the scene that really captures this story. According to news coverage, in July 2024, Salman was standing behind Trump at a campaign rally in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Photos show him there, visibly supporting his candidate, believing in the political process, thinking he was backing someone who would represent his community's interests. Fast forward 5 months, and he's watching those cabinet meeting remarks where the president he campaigned for made those controversial statements about his community. Now, think about this situation for a moment. This isn't criticism coming from an opposition politician or a longtime Trump critic. According to reporting, this is someone who put his reputation on the line for Trump, who convinced other people in his community to give Trump a chance, who believed that political engagement could bring people together around shared values. And then he heard statements that he felt targeted his entire community. So what happened next? According to CNN's reporting, on Saturday, Salman appeared on their network, and he did something that takes real conviction. He announced, and I'm quoting from the coverage, "I am formally announcing that I am ending all collaboration with the Republican Party." He described Trump's comments as racist and dehumanizing, according to the interview. He said the remarks hit him with significant impact. And then he said something that really struck reporters. "We felt betrayal by the president, the one we organized for and did an outreach for." That word betrayal tells you something important. According to his interview, this wasn't about policy disagreement or strategic differences. This was about feeling personally let down by someone he had trusted and campaigned for. And according to news reports, Salman wasn't alone in this reaction. There's an imam named Tawakkal Ismail, who, according to reporting, also announced he was cutting ties with the Republican Party. Other Somali community leaders, based on news coverage, expressed similar disappointment. These are people who, according to reports, took political risks to support Trump and now felt abandoned by his rhetoric. What really strikes me about these community responses is how measured they've been. According to the reporting I've seen, these aren't angry rants or emotional outbursts. These are thoughtful, principled statements from people who clearly gave this decision a lot of consideration. When someone like Salman goes on national television to explain his reasoning, you can tell this wasn't a snap judgment. This was something he wrestled with, something that kept him up at night, something that made him question his own political instincts. Now, let me tell you what makes this particularly significant from a political standpoint. According to the reporting, Salman didn't just quietly walk away. He went on national television to explain his reasoning. He told CNN, according to their coverage, it was very dehumanizing and unpresidential coming from the commander-in-chief of the United States to dehumanize a whole entire community. That kind of public break takes conviction. It means being willing to admit publicly that you supported someone who disappointed you, even when that might be embarrassing or invite criticism. Here's what I find really telling about the administration's response to this situation. Based on available reporting, there hasn't been any apparent effort to clarify the remarks or reach out to repair relationships with affected community members. The response seems to have been to continue with similar messaging rather than address the concerns that were raised. And according to news reports from Minnesota, Salman isn't the only Trump voter expressing second thoughts. Various outlets have reported on other Somali Americans who voted for Trump now expressing regret about that choice. People are talking, according to interviews, about feeling like their immigrant background overshadowed any policy agreements they might have had. This creates an interesting political dynamic. According to reporting, Trump's campaign worked to build a diverse coalition in 2024. They made outreach efforts to different communities. They talked about shared values. They convinced people like Salman to join their cause. And then, according to this story, those same coalition-building efforts were undermined by rhetoric that alienated the very people they had recruited. You know what's fascinating about this from a pure political science perspective? Coalition building and coalition maintenance are two completely different skills. Building a coalition requires you to find common ground, to emphasize shared interests, to convince people that their differences are less important than their similarities. Maintaining a coalition requires consistency, reliability, and an understanding that your words and actions affect real people who took real risks to support you. According to this story, we're seeing what happens when the coalition building skill doesn't translate into coalition maintenance skill. Because here's something worth noting about reaction to Trump's statements. According to news reports, even some Republicans expressed discomfort. Minnesota State Senator Jim Abler, a Republican, reportedly wrote a letter to Trump criticizing his remarks. When other GOP lawmakers in Minnesota were asked about the comments, according to reporting, they gave responses that neither defended nor strongly condemned them. So based on the coverage, Trump managed to create controversy that affected his own coalition members, created uncomfortable moments for his own party, and generated negative national coverage, apparently for the sake of making statements that may not have helped him politically. Let me also mention the broader context here, because this didn't happen in isolation. According to various reports, the Trump administration has been planning increased immigration enforcement activities in Minnesota. So you have a situation where enhanced enforcement is being planned while inflammatory rhetoric is being used, which, according to reporting, has created additional tension in affected communities. The timing is also worth noting since this happened during the holiday season. Christmas is traditionally associated with messages of peace and unity. Instead, according to the reporting, cabinet meetings featured controversial statements about American communities and citizens. But I want to focus on the bigger picture here, because this story illustrates something important about political communication. There's a difference between addressing legitimate law enforcement concerns and making broad statements about entire communities. When prosecutors pursue fraud cases, that's appropriate law enforcement. When politicians discuss the need for accountability in government programs, that's legitimate policy discussion. But when individual criminal cases become the basis for sweeping statements about entire groups, that crosses a different line. And we've seen similar patterns before in political rhetoric. The approach of taking specific incidents or cases and using them to make broader statements about entire communities. This can be effective with certain audiences because it allows people to feel justified in existing prejudices, but it also creates risks because it can contribute to discrimination and tension. That's exactly what Salman was referring to, according to his CNN interview, when he said the rhetoric creates real risks by fueling fear, division, and potential violence. Based on his statement, this isn't abstract political theory, but about real concerns for community safety. I think what makes Salman's story significant is what it represents about American political engagement. He represents the idea that people can change their positions when circumstances change. He represents the possibility that political coalitions can cross traditional lines. And he represents the principle that some values might be more important than party loyalty. When Salman campaigned for Trump, according to reporting, he was betting that shared values could overcome other differences. When he walked away, based on his statements, he was prioritizing what he saw as fundamental dignity over political convenience. Both positions required conviction. But this story also shows the challenges of coalition building when dealing with inflammatory rhetoric. Because regardless of how much bridge building people like Salman attempted, the kind of statements we saw this week apparently undermined those efforts, and that seems to be what disappointed Salman most. Based on his interviews, it wasn't just that he disagreed with the statements, but that he felt betrayed by someone he had trusted and campaigned for. Now, what comes next is an open question. Salman and others like him will need to decide how to engage politically going forward. Do they become independents? Do they look at other parties despite policy disagreements? Do they try to build new political organizations? These are real decisions that real people are making because of this week's events. The Republican Party also faces questions about coalition building. Based on this story, you can either pursue inflammatory rhetoric or build inclusive coalitions, but apparently not both. When you make statements that alienate communities, those communities tend to respond accordingly. For Trump, according to the reporting, this represents another example of rhetoric that may have undermined his own political interests. Just months after an election where coalition building was important, controversial statements apparently damaged relationships with people who had supported him. And for everyone else, this story demonstrates the real impact of political rhetoric. When high-profile figures make controversial statements, according to the reporting, it affects how people are treated in their communities, workplaces, and schools. It affects how children see themselves and their place in American society. But it's also a demonstration of individual conscience in action. According to the reporting, Salman could have stayed quiet or made excuses. Instead, he spoke up publicly. He drew a clear line about what he considered acceptable. That kind of principled stance makes a difference regardless of your political affiliations. You know, I keep thinking about the contrast between those July rally photos and the CNN interview. Salman supporting his candidate in July, then explaining why he couldn't continue that support in December. It's striking, but it's also hopeful because it shows people can recognize when they feel they've been let down and respond accordingly. That's not easy. It would be simpler to ignore concerning behavior or prioritize political convenience over personal principles. But according to the reporting, Salman chose what he saw as the principled path. That deserves respect regardless of your political views. As we head into the holiday season and reflect on this year's political developments, this story is worth considering. It's about the importance of standing up for your principles. It's about the real-world impact of political rhetoric. And it's about the possibility that people can change course when they feel their values are at stake. Because ultimately, this isn't just about Republicans or Democrats or any particular political figure. According to the story we've been following, it's about whether people can participate in American political life without facing derogatory statements from the highest levels of government. It's about choosing unity over division, dignity over degradation. And here's what gives me hope about this whole situation. Despite everything that happened, despite the disappointment and the sense of betrayal, people like Salman aren't giving up on the democratic process. They're not walking away from political engagement altogether. They're making principled stands. They're speaking truth to power. They're using their voices to demand better from their leaders. That's exactly how democracy is supposed to work. That's exactly what the founders had in mind when they created this system. Citizens holding their representatives accountable, refusing to accept behavior that falls short of their expectations, demanding that their leaders live up to the values they claim to represent. And based on what we've seen this week, those choices are still being made every day. People like Salman are making them. The question is whether others will follow similar principled approaches. Thanks for being here with me. Thanks for paying attention to these important stories. Thanks for caring about what happens when political rhetoric affects real people in real communities. That's what this is all about. I'll be back soon with more episodes of Future in View. Keep watching, keep thinking, keep expecting better from your leaders and from yourself. That's all we can do. That's all we need to do. Take care, my friend. Happy holidays. Be well.